Well, welcome to the Unscripted Pharmacist Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Rutzer, and today we're joined with Dr. Robert Lufkin, who just wrote a book, Lies I Taught in Medical School. But this is coming from the professor, the man of the institution of UCLA and USC. Like they're on this special hill for us, right? And you were definitely on this hill where we looked up to you for all the right answers. And as a radiologist, though, you started thinking outside the dark closet, shall we say. And after years of following that conventional medical advice, as a radiologist, you found yourself sick. And you had like 4 chronic disease diagnoses and you had young kids. Scary. And your own medical advice wasn't working. All right. But this prompted him to reflect deeply on his own medical training and what you ultimately discovered essentially was that you learned and what you learned and what you were taught was wrong, was flawed. And it was kind of like you discovered this secret. And there is kind of a secret person behind all this, isn't there? There's kind of a cool influence that when I hear this, I'm going, wow. This is kind of a major turning point for you when you met a certain person. All right. But your book serves as both a warning as well as an educational tool, which I really appreciate this. Okay. And this, because I enjoyed reading it as well. But the whole purpose of your book was to help us all from avoiding the same mistakes and going down the same road that you found yourself going down. And you've done something about it, which is bold and courageous. And I'll be honest, I'm a little jealous. Because I'm like, okay, I've been thinking about, I got my clippings together. I've started working on like, how could I create this book? You've done it for me, especially when you go into, and I love this because I love doing deep dives and chasing a lot of rabbits. But when you go into the pathophysiology of each chronic disease and the conditions, it really, for a lot of us, puts the pieces of the puzzle together. And when you find that out, you have this huge aha moment and you feel everything starts making sense. All the connections start. And your book is kind of that culmination of all those connections, isn't it? So anyways, Robert, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to be talking to you. As you can tell, you are up there for me because you are like, I look up to people like you, and meeting someone like this is really cool because it's like,
well, you're very kind, Kyle. Thank you for the kind remarks. And I'm a fan of your program, and it's really an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. So I'm excited about this. This is going to be fun.
Cool. So tell me, okay, so, man, you've obviously thought about what the response would be to those people that you've taught. And they're probably looking at you going, what are you talking about? You taught us all this, and now you're telling us something different. And this book kind of answers, what is it that's so different? And because people are going to come to you and say, hey, you taught me wrong? What? Like, I want a refund, right? And you can answer and go, hey, no, listen, I was wrong. So tell me, how many people have come back to you and how many people have you been able to influence with this book?
Yeah, well, great question. First of all, obviously the title is very provocative. It gets people's attention, but it underscores a basic principle about science in general and certainly medical education in particular. And I in the book I quote one of the greatest physicians of all time, Sir William Osler, who lived at the end of the last century, or at the beginning of the last century. And he famously made one of the best quotes about medical education when he addressed a graduating class of medical students who had just completed medical school. It was on the day they were going to become physicians. And he addressed them and famously said, gentlemen, and at that time, most of them were male, which is no longer the case. But he said, gentlemen, we have a confession to make. 50% of what we've just taught you in medical school is wrong. And furthermore, we're not sure which half it is. And that
go search it out.
Really, yeah, and that really sets the tone for all of us in science and medicine, that it's a moving target. Our knowledge is constantly evolving, and indeed the things we were taught before may not be true anymore, and we're constantly refining our view of reality. And that's what this book hopes to do. And like you say, point out a few of the things, the misconceptions that I had and that I'd actually taught. And sadly, many of my colleagues still have and are still teaching about a chronic disease epidemic. And I'm, like you say, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm basically part of the problem. I've spent my whole career in academic medicine, practicing medicine, teaching, doing research. I'm one of those guys who got, millions of dollars from drug companies to do research and written hundreds of peer-reviewed papers and all this sort of thing. And I still firmly believe that Western medicine has transformed our lives, certainly in the 20th century. All the pills and surgeries that were developed, largely through public health measures and infectious disease, but really everyone in the world today lives a better life because of the breakthroughs of medicine in the 20th century. But I think that the problem is, and what the book tries to address, is that in the 21st century, the world is different. Something is happening. In fact, we're now facing literally a tsunami of chronic diseases that make up of 80% of medical expenditures. And these chronic diseases are in epidemic proportions that were never before present in history, even accounting for differences in population. And while these diseases were present in the 20th century, they're now just exploding in the 21st century, where most people, most adults have at least one of these chronic diseases, and many have several of them. And the problem is, when Western medicine takes those pills and surgeries that were so revolutionary, so magical in their effect on the 20th century, and then just applies them to these 21st century chronic diseases, an interesting thing happens, is that for many of them, the pills actually work addressing the symptoms. In other words, I may feel better. If I'm a diabetic, my glucose spikes will go away and I won't die of ketoacidosis. But the problem is, and what we're just beginning to understand, is that these pills and surgeries address the acute symptoms, but in many, if not most of these diseases, it doesn't address what's called the root cause, and the disease continues to progress. And by muting or blocking the symptoms, making the symptoms go away, it's almost even worse, because then we don't worry about it anymore, but the disease is still progressing. And that's the challenge. And that's what happened to me. And like you mentioned, I went back to the research and the books, and on the shoulders of many giants, I learned kind of the revolution that's been going on, and that there's a way to address these chronic diseases, and it's really not with pills or surgery. Unfortunately, the secret is something else, and it's the same approach that works for all of them, all the way from obesity to diabetes to hypertension to cancer, cardiac arrest, heart attack, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, even mental illness. And that list is the list of things that, for you and I and most of our listeners, will be the things that end our lives. Those are the diseases that we die of. And the interesting thing is, when we push back those diseases using some of the transformative things that I talk about in the book, we actually improve our lifespan, and we start living longer, healthier lives. And that's what I'm excited about. And I want to communicate the message to as many people as I can, so they don't make the same mistakes that I did.
Yeah, this epidemic, really, what we're suffering from, these non-communicable diseases, this diseases of Western civilization. And when I say diseases of Western civilization, I immediately think of Gary Taubes. So tell me about, how did you stumble upon him and this disease of Western civilization, this exposure to these toxins essentially what we call our.
As it turns out, Gary Tops is an old friend of mine. He lived in Santa Monica, and we knew each other. For those of you who don't know, he's a science journalist, a brilliant journalist. He's written several New York Times best-selling books on nutrition and rethinking basically the metabolic story that I talk about. And one of his first books that he was working on that I recommend to everyone is Good Calories, Bad Calories is a place to start. But he has several more, and they're all fantastic. But I used to pass by Gary in Santa Monica on my way to work, and he would be, working in a cafe at a coffee shop or something. And, we chat a little bit, but interestingly, I didn't really pay attention to what he was doing other than he was a nice guy and a friend. So it's not like we hammered out concepts on this. His work predated my epiphany or rebirth about this. So I knew what he was doing, but I didn't do a real deep dive until I came down with the diseases myself. I'd like to say, I was curious and I wanted to make the world a better place, but no, I was forced into this when I developed these chronic diseases, and it was really out of self-interest that I started doing this because I didn't want to die myself. But,
right. You were scared to death.
Exactly. It got me to the same place. So hopefully I can now amplify Gary's message and many other people in this space, that are.
What a strange coincidence, right? Isn't that a weird, such a weird coincidence? Hey, two people writing books just kind of pass by each other, just off by several years. But that's so cool because I know Gary has just a tremendous influence. I mean, man, the swath that you think about it. And you as well. This is kind of something that you felt like you probably needed to do. What was the inspiration of really
for the book? You mean?
Yeah. Getting it written.
Well, like I said, I spent my whole career in academic medicine, so I've written a lot of textbooks, and I've written a lot of hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific papers, which are sort of the gold standard of scientific research, but. I realized, at the end of the day, nobody read them or anything. I mean, it was a very narrow section. Just by the nature of scientific research, you don't reach a wide audience. And when I began understanding what was possible in my life and what a lot of people, my colleagues, are not aware about these chronic diseases, I realized that it wasn't a matter of writing scientific papers again, because there actually are scientific papers that I based my book on. So, to be clear, this is not original research that I discovered. I basically go back to the scientific papers and I reference them in my book. So if people want to, they can look at them. But so I realized, writing one more scientific paper wasn't going to move the dial. So I did something I'd never done before, is I basically started on social media. I had 10 Twitter followers. It was called Twitter at the time, and YouTube, and I began writing a book, not for academics, but for regular people. So this book is aimed at everybody, on the man on the street, the woman on the street, the kids on the street. It's illustrated with a lot of pictures and diagrams, like photos of me and my dog and different stuff like that. But also it has references. Like I say, I try to when I make a claim, I try to leave a reference. So in the back, people who are interested in, I encourage everybody to do it, although some people may not be inclined to, but look at the original references. You can read them and interpret them yourself. But it also, several people have said this book is great because they can take it and they read it, they like it, then they can hand it to their doctor. And because the references are in there, the doctor is not going to say, well, Rob Lufkin says this, or Dr. Lufkin says this. Well, that doesn't mean anything. Expert opinion is the lowest level of scientific evidence. And, whether my mom says it or Dr. Lufkin says it or any other expert, we should discount those opinions in favor of peer-reviewed scientific research. And that's what I try to include in the book. And I encourage everyone to do that. And I continually question my own beliefs, and constantly look to refine my view of reality with these ideas as well.
Right. The last thing you want some patient to tell you is, I believe you. I don't want you to believe me. Please don't challenge everything. Go ahead, look it up. Please, I want you to see it. I want you to lay eyes on it. Let's go through it. Let's talk about it. But you're right. The data's there. The study, the mechanisms, the proof of the mechanism, all of essentially the root cause of chronic disease. I guess it's somewhat debatable. Some people say it's the muscle. Some people it starts with the fat cell. What's your origin story of the metabolic syndrome and this mitochondrial focused cellular biology, the concept of life? I think you gotta go into it a little bit about mitochondrial lessons.
Yeah, the book talks a lot about metabolism, and I believe metabolic dysfunction is at the root cause of all these chronic diseases, if not the root cause, but certainly a root cause. And this manifests as things like chronic inflammation, insulin resistance, and oxidation. We talk about how all those things manifest from metabolic disease and contribute to these chronic diseases. We dive into it deeply with things like mTOR as a metabolic switch, and we even talk about certain drugs like rapamycin, which can improve our metabolic health and even increase our longevity, at least in the animal model. It's the most powerful pharmaceutical intervention across any animal species that's been tried on, has shown significant lifespan improvement beyond all others. And even humans are beginning to take it off label for its FDA approved drug. It's very safe, but it requires a prescription. But we talk about that, but metabolism is really key. It's the driver for these diseases, and we talk about mechanisms on how that can be. I mean, diabetes at its very root is a metabolic disease, with insulin resistance, and that drives all the other diseases in this. You don't have to be diabetic to get Alzheimer's disease, but they're certainly related. This metabolic dysfunction underlying all of them, and most adults, it's been some papers show up to 90% of adults have at least one metabolic marker of dysfunction. And this metabolic dysfunction then will manifest as one or more of these chronic diseases. In other words, it's not necessarily a progression where you get fat, then you get diabetes, then you get a heart attack, and then you die. Some people are not fat and they don't get diabetes, but they get Alzheimer's disease. Other people, may get cancer. Other people may get mental illness. But what I propose in the book and when we talk about, and I think the evidence is really strong, it's the metabolic dysfunction underlying all of these basically increases our risk for these diseases. And then based on our genetics and other factors, it may manifest, appear as cancer, or it may appear as diabetes, or it may appear as Alzheimer's disease. But I suggest that the root cause, and arguably the way to treat it in some cases, I'm not suggesting we replace Western medicine or that anybody discontinue their drugs, although I was able to discontinue the drugs as I was put on for my 4 diseases by using this plan. That should only be done in cooperation with a physician, certainly any prescribed medicines. But the interesting thing is it's possible to do this.
Sure.
The other wake-up call for me was that these chronic diseases don't appear. Western medicine we have certain criteria for each of these diseases. And it's, for diabetes, if you're, a blood marker called hemoglobin A1C is beyond a certain point, you're diagnosed as diabetic. But when it's a little bit lower, you're not. And I used to think, as many people still do, that I get the disease when the doctor diagnoses it, when they say, oh, you've got Alzheimer's, or, oh, you've got cancer or something. But what real wake up for me is what I now understand to be true is that these chronic diseases, literally all of them that I mentioned, manifest and begin years to decades before the doctor diagnoses them.
Right.
And if we wait until the doctor says, oh, you've got cancer, or, oh, you've got heart disease, having a heart attack, we've missed an opportunity for prevention. And the techniques that I talk about, lifestyle, is what we can do even before we get these diseases. And I believe, and there's evidence to show, we can decrease our chance of getting these chronic diseases or delay them down the line by adopting a healthy, metabolically healthy lifestyle before the doctor diagnoses any of these diseases, while we're young, while we're 25 or 30, indeed your whole life. These are not things to do necessarily when you're diagnosed with Alzheimer's suddenly start, although you can do it and it works for certain things. But I'm encouraging everyone to adopt this healthy, metabolically healthy lifestyle, whether you have any disease or not, because that's when it's most powerful.
So what would you recommend as preventative measures for your Joe Blow and say, hey, I need to get my annual checkup, but we're going to change this up a little bit. What are you looking for? Like you and I, we love certain types of labs, right? And we know what they mean. And it's how can the common user just go out there and go, okay, I want to get on the right track. I'm going to read this book. I'm going to figure out what's wrong with me. Maybe I've got, high hypertension. Maybe I don't even have high blood sugar. I don't even think that's even relevant, right? But I got high blood pressure. When I have high blood sugar or not, I have high triglycerides. I have a low HDL, and I've got all this weight in the center section. My waist size is continually. I'm having to expand and get more belt holes, right? Because I'm expanding beyond my borders here. And like, what would you suggest because I love numbers, because I love to show change. So baseline, what would you recommend as a baseline approach to, hey, I want to get on this kick. I'm going to go meet with my doctor. We're going to talk about exercise. We're going to talk about labs. And I want to do this in a safe way. What would you suggest?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. But before I go into that, let me say one other way my thinking has changed. There these lab markers, as you say, they indicate when we have a disease, when they pass a certain threshold. And before that threshold, we don't have the disease, according to Western medicine. Either either you have diabetes or you don't. Right. And I used to think of diabetes like I thought of most of the diseases. You either have it or you don't, and based on genetics, lifestyle and stuff, some people get it, some people don't. Well, there's an interesting study that we talk about in the book that took a large population of non-diabetic adults using the Framingham data and the NHANES data, some great population databases. And they showed an interesting thing, that hemoglobin A1C, which is one of the main markers for diabetes, as we age, the hemoglobin A1C goes up and up and up and up and up and up like that. Well, what does that mean? Well, the take-home message for me is that type 2 diabetes may be something like gray hair or wrinkles. In other words,
part of life.
If we don't die of something else first, we're on the track for that, because our hemoglobin A1C is going up. Our inflammation is going up. A lot of things are happening. So, and if we live long enough and we talk about in the book, longevity. The second to last chapter is all about longevity, because that's what happens when you start living a healthy life. People start living longer, and there's a revolution in longevity that, that's a whole nother conversation. That there's going to be huge improvements in lifespan coming up.
I hope so.
But the point is, even though I'm not diabetic now, or I don't have Alzheimer's now, or I don't have, you name it, of these chronic diseases, it's best if I assume that I'm on the path for them, and I should begin to do this healthy lifestyle right away, and even if all my labs
it's not this,
normal,
it's not this, I caught this disease. It's not, I caught this. No, I've been progressing and moving in this slow, infinitely like nonsensible direction towards this disease, that if you think about the intervention that fixes that is what, 30 minutes a day, changing how you're eating, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a small intervention.
And
it's
people
tiny,
feel better
though.
too. It's not just delaying chronic disease. I mean, I feel much better than I do. I don't have brain fog, all these other things. But yeah, the point is, and we talk about this in the longevity chapter. When people die, what determines their longevity? Eventually, we all die, right? So we die of something. But people think of longevity and aging as just wearing out. Eventually we wear out, like my shirt wears out, my shoes wear out, my car wears out, everything wears out, right? We wear out. Well, living organisms don't work that way. And they're, our germline cells, sperm and eggs don't wear out at all. They're immortal. And there's even immortal species of animals, like the immortal jellyfish we talk about in the book. So it's not that we wear out. Instead, we die of one of those chronic diseases that I just mentioned, and the ones that are exploding now. So when someone dies of a heart attack, it's not that their heart wears out. They specifically have this specific disease. So the point is, we're all on a path. We're going to get one of those diseases. We're going to die of something, and statistically, it will be a short list, and the list is heavily weighted towards those chronic diseases. The top ones are heart attack, stroke, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and those are the chronic diseases that we can influence with our lifestyle. So I would recommend, and what I'm recommending in this book is that people embrace the healthy lifestyle now, even if their labs are completely normal. But most people, well, backing up, you asked the question, what are normal values? And my answer is, well, we don't want to have normal values in our labs, because most Americans, I mean, you go down the list, 50% of Americans have high blood pressure, hypertension. Most Americans are either overweight or obese, pre-diabetes, diabetes. So we don't want to be normal. And the values that our physicians have based on labs are oftentimes usually normal values. You're above that, you're below that. Instead, what I propose are optimal values, ideal values we should shoot for. So, instead of a fasting insulin of less than 20 is normal, that's not good. It should be less than 5, I believe, because
but those lab markers that they're commonly putting in the brackets, this is your range. I mean, that's based on the population that they're testing. And so these numbers, as you know, because you taught in medical school too, these numbers have gone up. Like what's a normal, liver function test, right? As well as what's a normal triglyceride level, right? You and I have different numbers. We're like, what's optimal? Hey, man, I want to get my HDL, my good cholesterol, as you want to call it, as high as possible. How am I going to do that? Right?
Yeah, and the levels in the healthcare system for like diabetes, hemoglobin A1C 6.5. Above that, you then classify the patient as a diabetic. You can start billing for diabetic charges. You can start prescribing things. Below that, it's not. But if you have if you have 6.4, you're still normal. You're actually pre-diabetic, but let's leave that for now.
Right.
But you wouldn't be called a diabetic, but you don't want to be there. You want to be way lower. You want to be down by 5 if you can,
Right. It's like you're pregnant, right? You're pregnant. Something's going to happen 9 months from now. Okay. You're 6.4. Like, what direction? Like, why do we get so stuck on these numbers and these diagnoses? I've gotten in major fights with people to say, hey, it's just a number on a line. Where are you on that line? Let's push you way over here on this line, right? Let's stay away from that. But it's also now that we have more information with this new technology, with the CGM, continuous glucose monitor, it's like, wait a minute, an average isn't telling me much anymore. I want to know, what is your time in range? How much are you varying, right? We talked about mental illness and Alzheimer's disease and these massive fluctuations in blood glucose, right? And creating these mood disorders and mental illness. Can you imagine if the world could embrace that? Is that the reason that they're feeling the way they're feeling is because of the roller coaster ride they're on?
Absolutely. And you mentioned one thing I just want to shout out. For the first time in history, CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, are available in the United States as of a couple of weeks ago, over the counter without a doctor's prescription. So you don't need to go to your doctor anymore to get them, because a lot of doctors would refuse to prescribe them. They, for all sorts of reasons.
They're not diabetic.
Exactly. And so two companies, one is Abbott and the other's Dexcom. They're the leading manufacturers of them, but they have these consumer versions. You can go to their website, Stelo, Stelo, or Lingo, Lingo. I'm wearing both of them now. And you can
really?
just order them. Yeah. Cool. I'm comparing them, but you can just order them, and it's like an engine gauge on your metabolism. You can see what foods spike your glucose. And to be clear, glucose spikes are not, they're things to be avoided, ideally, to be metabolically healthy. So, but it's not just foods that spike your glucose. You can have an argument with your coworker, that could spike your glucose. Other factors can do it too. So it's a great insight that. But I love what you said about. Go ahead.
I had a patient with a bad dream and it just spiked her. I'm like, what were you doing? And she's like, it was up for like 4 hours in the middle of the night. I'm like, what happened last night? And she's like, I had a dream of someone stabbing me, and I was running the whole night, trying to run away from someone. She's like, what I watch before I go to bed really affects my blood sugar throughout the evening. I'm like, oh my gosh. But it's cool when you can correlate your lifestyle with something that's measurable and something that you can learn from. Because you're obviously learning like crazy, because this must be the real game changer for you, because it was for me.
I love them. And I wanted to reach back to a comment you made about mental health and anxiety, and one of the chapters in the book is about mental illness. And there's been, you may have had on your program, there's been a revolution in our understanding of psychiatric disease, things like schizophrenia and manic depressive disorder. And shout out to Chris Palmer and Georgia Eade, who both written great books on this. But they basically they did a fascinating thing. Chris works at Harvard Hospitals in McLean. He's a psychiatrist. He deals with institutionalized people with severe mental illness. And he noticed, and other people have noticed too, that epilepsy, the drugs for epilepsy overlap with the drugs for schizophrenia and mental illness. Some of the same ones work. And then it was noticed that epilepsy responds to metabolic treatments. In other words, a metabolically healthy lifestyle can reduce epilepsy or reduce seizures. It's one of the earliest treatments for seizures is to go into ketosis, and that works. So they raised both of them, and now this has been repeated at Stanford independently, and many hospitals now are doing this. But they began taking their patients and putting them on a metabolically healthy diet, just like we talk about in the book, a metabolically healthy lifestyle, but specifically with diet, and put them into something called ketosis, which is a healthy metabolic state. And what they noticed was that, and Chris, they both talk about it in their books, but I was talking to Chris about it, and it works for some patients, not all patients by any means, but some patients, it's revolutionary. In other words, one patient went off all psychiatric medicines and returned home to his family, got a job, and returned to society just by doing these metabolic interventions with nutrition. And I always tell the story. I ask Chris, I say, well, Chris, that's wonderful, but how do you know it's the diet? How do you know it's the ketosis, the metabolically healthy diet? I mean, maybe it's something else going on you don't know. He says, well, one of my patients, Bill, who has schizoaffective disorder, which schizophrenia, as your audience may know, is a psychiatric condition that's characterized by voices. You hear voices talking to you, and that's unlike almost any other disease. But he basically got out of the hospital, got off all psychiatric medicines, went home to his family, got a job. And I said, Chris, but how do you know it's the ketosis? He says, well, it's easy. Bill tells me he knows that when he eats junk food, which takes him out of ketosis, or if he strays from the diet, the voices start talking to him again, and then he immediately goes back into ketosis and they go away. So
where are those voices when he's making those choices? Like, okay, put it back.
Yeah, exactly. But to your point, it raises a great question. I mean, most of us, thankfully, don't have clinically diagnosed psychiatric conditions. We don't have that severe mental illness. But I would submit that all of us, I certainly do, deal with the stress, the anxiety, the pressure of dealing with my spouse, my kids, my coworkers, my boss, my employees, that we go up and down with anger and stress and frustration. And you can't help but wonder if this junk food, which is driving a metabolically unhealthy lifestyle, if switching to a metabolically healthy life wouldn't, for some of us, make our own mental health much better. If junk food can make these people crazy at Harvard, what's it doing to our kids? And everybody who's basically, everybody's eating junk food all the time today, in today's world.
Right. Can we bring these peaks down? Can we bring all of these peaks so that they're like, really, the human body is probably never really designed to see this much sugar.
Yeah.
This is crazy. Like, we've never dealt with this before. This is insane. Of course we're going to have problems. We've never seen this before. But what's interesting is that your healthy lifestyle that you're talking about, not only, it changes everything. It changes the fueling, I think, is step one, as you feel energized and you start moving. And movement is that really important medicine, which always improves insulin sensitivity, and glucose never becomes a problem. You don't spike. You don't have these huge fluctuations. So it's exercise. Of course, the muscles are feeding the brain this wonderful, basically lovely soup for it, BDNF and myokines, right? And it's helping you control your fluctuations and your mood disorder. So movement helps with the brain. Movement is going to help with your thoughts. For me, it was like healthy body, healthy mind. Why does all of this seem to be connected to each other? These aren't just subspecialties of mental illness and cardiovascular. Like, everything is linked through my lifestyle, but it feeds onto better and more goodness through, I think, keeping carbohydrates under control, keeping glucose under control, keeping our insulin in a very, like you say, very low, less than 5.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all those things play. I mean, and with the dietary things, I think glucose control, carbohydrate control is fundamental. So I eliminate those, but also seed oils, I think, are underappreciated, which are industrial oils. They can also drive insulin resistance and inflammation, and they're they're particularly hard because they're in all salad dressings, a lot of hummus, and all fried food, essentially, for the most part, is in seed oils. And so it's challenging to get those out of our lives, but those are important as well.
Yeah. I think people just, hey guys, hang on. It's going to get easier to do this diet as we have more consumer demand for the right foods, and more of us are able to change our lifestyle. It'll become easier to do this, because otherwise it's pretty difficult, isn't it? It's because you're just bombarded with this garbage.
Yeah, I mean, it's in everything we eat. Basically, the supermarkets are full of junk food. Most of the stuff we're served is junk food, and then on top of it, we get conflicting opinions from medical experts. We have, institutions like the American Heart Association that says seed oils are healthy. It's ignoring the fact that the American Heart Association was essentially funded by a multi-million-dollar grant from Procter & Gamble decades ago. And Procter & Gamble is the maker of the original seed oil product called Crisco, which was originally a lubricant for German submarines. But they repurposed it as a food. And now, Crisco, canola oil, corn oil, all those oils are everywhere. But we get information from supposedly trusted sources that, in my opinion, is not true and harmful.
Yeah. And I think in order for people to get the right information, they almost kind of have to ignore the advice of their physician. I know that's probably controversial to you. What would you tell a future physician today?
Well, I think the key thing is to be aware of these chronic diseases and their basis in metabolism. Modern medicine is siloed. In other words, one way you can get expertise in very narrow areas, which is necessary to operate at a high level, is to have specialists. Have neurosurgeons, you have endocrinologists, you have obstetricians, but they can sometimes miss the big picture. And this is a big picture story. I mean, one thing we're doing on a bright note as far as doing that, we've gotten a charity that has agreed to distribute our book to all medical schools in the United States. And we may expand it nationally and hopefully get all medical students a copy at no cost. Yes. The publisher's waiving the fees, and I'm contributing the royalties back to the charity. So hopefully we can, get at least put it on people's radar that this is important and that they need to study it.
Required reading freshman year. This is your intro class right here. I love it. That is so comforting to hear. That is fantastic. See, you're making a huge difference. That's talk about an influence. To be able to influence the physicians that are looking at, and maybe they're going to find root cause. And you're right. If they look at all these diseases that they're learning about from a metabolic standpoint, wow, what an advantage. Okay, that's fantastic. Okay. Hey, I know you want to tell us about you want to offer us a free chapter of your book. So is that still on the table? Can we still do that?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, if people, if you don't want to go out and buy the book or get it from your library and without trying it, you can go to my website and download a free chapter. But the first chapter, you can read it, see if the style resonates with you, makes sense. And it's both a PDF and an audio version, depending on how you like to consume your media. But just go to my website, which is robertlufkinmd.com. And you can download it there. And I'm active on social media. Please say hi. I'd like to hear from you.
Yes. No, you're very active on LinkedIn. I love your stuff on LinkedIn. It's excellent. It's to the point. They're typically pretty cool memes that are pretty funny. Oftentimes making fun of yourself and your own profession, as I would. But no, I really appreciate what you're doing. You're making a huge impact. Thank you for being on my show. And I really, really appreciate what you're doing. You're making a difference. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much, Kyle. I appreciate our conversation. It was a lot of fun, and I appreciate also, thanks for the work you're doing. It's great.
Cool. All right. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you. Have a great day, guys.